Stop it right now. Abstinence is not birth control. Is it because they don't know this information, or is it because they are intellectually dishonest? Yes, probably both. Excellent point. You know what? I too am a big fan of universal healthcare and socialized medicine.
Welcome back to the comment section. I'm Brett Cooper. Apparently, NBC had not pulled enough right-wing hate pieces out of their asses recently, so they published a new steaming pile of crap. All right, so this was published on July 2nd, and they wrote, major conservative influencers have coalesced in recent months around talking points that connect birth control with a variety of negative health outcomes, which experts say instill fear in women who could otherwise benefit from using birth control.
I don't see anything wrong with what we just read. We've talked about that extensively, about how influencers are demonizing the birth control pill and about how incredibly monetarily beneficial it is to be in the hormone health space. I have a whole video about the hormone health hoax and how they're doing that. So I'm already confused as to what's wrong with that description.
That darn science is allowing those damn conservatives to create talking points. Obviously.
That only applies if your interpretation of the science is accurate and also your representation of it.
Do you actually think that this is about health or truth, or do you think it's them wanting to fuel a greater political divide and make us all look terrible? But I did...
Yeah. Okay. Who does that? Who does that? Not you and your people.
And in regards to the conservative folks that they referenced, they were actually spot on. Like, the article was not that crazy because everything that these conservative influencers have been saying is actually very accurate and very balanced.
I'm gonna have to go find the article.
Brought up Alex Clots, and she is very vocally, against birth control, and they quoted her in this article and said, the Clark wrote, birth control can be right for some in some cases, but we shouldn't just take it blindly because of acne, and we shouldn't treat it as the default for all women. That is a very rational and balanced statement.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to some extent I would agree with that, but it's reasonable for someone to be on contraception for acne. That is a around the world option for the treatment of hormonal acne. You can't just sandwich two truths around a statement that you tangentially decided was applicable because of those two truths. So is it true that we shouldn't treat it as the right thing for all people? Yeah. Is it true that you should have all the information before being given it? Yeah. Is it true that you shouldn't take it for acne? No.
How is that a conservative take? How is saying maybe 14-year-old girls who aren't having sex shouldn't be prescribed birth control? How is that crazy and divisive?
Okay, first, hi, Brett, if you're watching this, which you most certainly are not. You don't get to decide if we should or shouldn't prescribe birth control to a 14-year-old who's not having sex. I went to school for a very long time to be the one who decides if that is an appropriate option for someone who is in my clinic. That's my job. Is it true that everybody who's 14 and not having sex should not be just given contraception willy-nilly? Yeah. Is it true that it is not appropriate for a 14-year-old to be prescribed a hormonal contraception because Brett Cooper said so? No.
The important thing here is that women should be able to make informed consent. And right now, a lot of women are not able to. The problem is that doctors offer us birth control as a fix-all. You have acne? Try birth control. Your periods are painful? Great! Let's give you something to chemically suppress your hormones that make you a woman. Oh, you're gaining weight? Let's try a different form of birth control. It is totally fine to take a pill that chemically alters the very hormones that make a woman a woman.
Do you see what she's doing here? She's saying, oh yeah, I agree that it's the right choice for some people and that you should have information before making that choice. And then she's pretending that she thinks that's the case. And then she's going on to say, but actually, it's not okay to take anything that alters your hormones because that's what makes you a woman. Ergo, saying, I don't think that you should be on this because it alters the very fabric of why you're a woman, which is a weird thing to say in general, but also just not true, but also just completely and directly contradicts what she is trying to say the premise of her argument is. I believe it should be everybody's choice and you should have all the information, which is why as a physician, I make this content on the internet and provide you with that information. I have a whole video several videos about exactly these things. That's not what they're doing here. They're saying, oh yeah, actually, I think you should just get more information. You should be given the information, blah, blah, blah. And then providing inaccurate information and feelings-driven information, right? Aren't these the people that are like, facts don't care about your feelings? Well, yeah, your feelings on the hormones that make you a woman not being okay to alter are not facts.
On birth control, because the right-wingers want a ton of unplanned pregnancies, which is what they were trying to insinuate with this article. It's because after COVID, people re-woke up to Big Pharma in a big way and realized that it is not for our benefit, because Big Pharma makes money when we rely on them and
Excellent point. You know what? I too am a big fan of universal health care and socialized medicine. That is such an excellent point that you've made.
Rely on them by being unhealthy. We're questioning the entire industry of Big Pharma and what they are paid and incentivized to push. And that includes birth control. It is not about birth control and everything trickles down. It is about Big Pharma as an institution. I feel like
That's not what it's about when you are making up lies about birth control or saying you support choice and information and giving bad information. That's not what it's about. Additionally, I will say that hormonal contraception is treated the same way in New Zealand as it is in the US. So it would be kind of silly to say if it's not significantly different in a country with socialized healthcare, that it's all on the basis of whatever it is that she's talking about.
Then brought up the recent studies done about the side effects of birth control, of which there are many. And they tried to brush this off. And they brought up one really important study that was done in 2018, which found an association between taking hormonal birth control and suicide attempts and suicide in women in Denmark. And this is a very well-respected study, and a lot of people know about it.
Yes, and you're going to present it in a not good way. You're about to do it, and then I'll just pull up my own video and we'll watch what I have to say about it, okay?
And this article brushed it off and said, well, doctors also say that depression and suicide increases in pregnancy, so it's fine. So women are just doomed.
That's not what the article said. I promise I will find it. And it's also not what doctors are saying, as evidenced by the fact that, hello, I am a doctor. Let's see what a doctor says about it. All right, I'll let you finish your sentence.
They don't actually care about your health. But even the
do we not?
Doctor that they were interviewing throughout this entire article, who was on their side, could not deny the truth behind this report, saying that the 2018 Dutch study into suicide and hormonal birth control was really important and well done. Now, some of the things that they did not include.
This is the problem, right? Doctors are intellectually honest, and media commentators, particularly who like to make things like this person does, are not. So they can present things as being hardcore fact and, black and white, like we were talking about earlier. Whereas if you interview me for an article, I'm going to necessarily bring in all of the gray areas. The study, it is well done. I said that, but it also doesn't draw the conclusion that these influencers are trying to draw from it. So I'm going to pull up my own video on this and I will show you what I mean. The data actually said that the hormonal contraceptive pill doubles the risk of suicide attempt and triples the risk of suicide completion. Non-users of hormonal contraceptives had a suicide attempt rate of about 1 in 1,000. People who were started on hormonal contraceptives, that increased to about 2 in 1,000. For suicide completion rates, we're looking at numbers like 6 in a million on non-users to 19 in a million for people who were started on hormonal contraceptive pills. So it tripled the risk. For sure, important information, I think, really needs to be given in a way that makes the risk more understandable than just saying double or triple. It also doesn't serve the idea that these shouldn't be used. It speaks to the importance of screening people for underlying side conditions, of talking about any family history, things like that, and of discussing with patients that if you are feeling different after starting this medication, you need to let us know. There needs to be follow-up and checking in and making sure everybody understands that this is a risk, albeit relatively small, and that we should take you off of it if you start feeling like you have worsening mental status after starting the medication. There you go. Okay. That is exactly what this person is about to do and has just done. Okay. Exactly what I said there is that they have taken this study, which is very well done, and they are weaponizing that as a way to say birth control bad. But that is not the appropriate conclusion to be drawn from that study. What is appropriate conclusion to be drawn from that study is exactly what I just said in that video, which is we need to talk with our patients about this. That's all. That's it. It's not birth control bad. It's we need to talk about it.
Where the hormonal birth control has been proven to increase the risk of blood clots and stroke, increase the risk for certain cancers like breast, ovarian, and liver cancer, perpetuate...
Okay, I'm going to pre-teach you the actual information, and then I will show you what she's saying. Hormonal birth control increases the risk of blood clots and stroke. That is partially true. Non-pregnant, not on contraception. Your risk of blood clot out of 10,000 is 1 to 5, all right? On combined hormonal contraception, that is 3 to 9. All right. So somebody could look at that and go, it increases it by 9 times. And that would not be a necessarily inaccurate statement. But what do those numbers come out to be? So 1 to 5, we're going to say 2. All right. 2, 10,000. All right. 0.02%. And we're going to go in the middle and say 6. 6 in 10,000. 0.06%. Okay? Does this make sense? The risk of a blood clot on hormonal contraception is 0.06%. What you're seeing, or you will see when I show you back to her video, is that they're going to complain that people aren't given the information, and then they're going to give the information in an alarming fashion. 0.06% is not a number to ignore, but it is a very small number. And a number changing from baseline outside of pregnancy and contraception being 2 or 3 to 5 or 6 is a change, but 3 in 10,000 versus 6 in 10,000 is not a massive change if you look at absolute risk. So the problem with this is that people are not well versed on absolute versus relative risk. Your absolute risk of a blood clot on hormonal contraceptives that are combined with estrogen and progesterone is still really, really low. It's just relative to not being on anything that it's a little bit higher. Yes, we do reference pregnancy, and that article probably does for a reason, because a lot of people who are using hormonal contraception are doing it to prevent pregnancy. Your risk in pregnancy, while still absolutely low as far as a risk overall, is significantly higher than when you are on combined hormonal contraceptives, okay? That is why they reference it. And then look how high it is when you're postpartum, all right? Does this make sense? Does this make sense why I'm saying that just giving the information in the way that these people do it is not actually providing what they pretend to be for informed consent, which is not really the correct way to use that terminology, but that's fine. It's not giving accurate information, which is what they pretend to care about. Is it because they don't know this information, or is it because they are intellectually dishonest? Yes, probably both. I don't know. Okay, after that, she's going to say that it increases the risk of certain cancers, breast, ovarian, and liver cancer. The risk of cancer on a hormonal contraceptive is slightly increased for a short time period after you've stopped it and while you're on it. However, if you look at overall cancer rates of people, so any type of cancer, not focusing on these three with slight and temporary increases in risk associated with contraception, then you will see that people who have used hormonal contraceptives at any point in their life, their overall cancer risk of any cancer diagnosis is actually the same or lower than someone who has never been on any form of hormonal contraception. And that is because what they will leave out when they say it increases the risk of cancer is that it also decreases the risk of other cancers. And that is a persistent effect that you maintain through your life even after you go off of it. Then they will talk about perpetuating autoimmune conditions. That's not something that is even close to representing the truth. There are many autoimmune conditions which are helped by hormonal contraceptives and others which can be exacerbated. It's a very individual reaction and people have to make that decision for themselves. Lead to reproductive issues. This is blatantly false. There is no data that indicates hormonal contraception is detrimental to your reproductive health. Increases the risk of depression. I'm just going to talk about it in relative terms because I don't have the study pulled up in front of me. So what I will say about depression is there is some evidence that in some people being on hormonal contraceptives may increase the risk or severity of depression. There is also evidence that in some people it may be improved by being on hormonal contraceptive. The risk is very similar to what we saw with VTE or blood clots, that it is not such a large increase that it means you shouldn't be on hormonal contraceptives. It just means if you start a new medication and your depression is worsening, then we should talk about trying a different one or going off of it. Oh, this is perfect. She's going to say exactly what I debunked in that other video, which is nearly triple the risk of suicide in young women, okay? Don't forget, this is the study that she's talking about, okay? I know we just watched this. We're going to watch it again. Non-users of hormonal contraceptives had a suicide attempt rate of about 1 in 1,000. People who were started on hormonal contraceptives, that increased to about 2 in 1,000. Suicide attempt. 1 in 1,000, not on hormonal contraception, 2 in 1,000 on it, okay? That's what they're talking about when they say double the risk of suicide attempt. 1 in 1,000 to 2 in 1,000. For suicide completion rates, we're looking at numbers like 6 in a million on non-users to 19 in a million for people who were started on hormonal contraceptive pills. 6 in a million to 19 in a million, okay? That's the triple increased rate of suicide. Now, is that a number that is insignificant or should be ignored? No, absolutely not. Is it a number that should be presented to the general public without the discussion of what it actually means as you're going to have a 3 times higher risk of suicide? No, that is equally dishonest and problematic to presenting it as not important, okay? I think those are both equal sides of the spectrum, saying it doesn't matter, this risk is not important to consider, and saying it's 3 times higher, you're going to have a 3 times higher rate of suicide if you go on hormonal contraceptive. Those are both incorrect, and I guess not incorrect by the data, but intellectually dishonest and not how this data should be approached. Okay, I've prepped you for all of the things that she's going to not be fully honest about here.
Autoimmune conditions trigger deficiencies in vital nutrients, lead to reproductive issues, increase risk of depression, and nearly triple the risk of suicide in young women. All of this is written in that blanket-sized side effects paper. But doctors never tell you any of that. That's the problem. They expect that you're going to go home and read all of those things before you take it.
I will concede and agree that there are many situations where people are not given information that they need about medications that they are provided. However, yes, we do expect that if you want every single data point about this, you will read that. Because if something is incredibly low on a side effect risk, that's not something we can have a detailed conversation about, because there are thousands of very low incidence side effects with any medication that can come up. And to pretend that we can go over each of those individually, but it's not important if it's important to you to go through the information that you are given with your medication, like that is silly. There is a level of appropriate information that should be provided, which is not often provided. And I definitely, absolutely agree with that. That's one of the reasons that I do what I do on the internet. But to imply that somebody needs to go through and talk about all of the things that could happen and happen to 1 in a million people is silly. We should say birth control comes along with risks. Almost every risk that can happen with a contraceptive pill is at least 2 to 10 times more of a risk during pregnancy and postpartum. Specifically, if you start this medication and anything else going on with you changes or you start feeling bad, I want you to let me know. If you have suicidal thoughts, I should know about that before I prescribe this. And specifically, if you have suicidal thoughts after you get on it, that is a medical emergency and you need to come in. If your depression worsens, you should not stay on this and talk to me about what we should do different. If you have any symptoms of blood clots, you need to let us know, okay? But aside from that, you don't have a obligation to go into all 7,000 things that can happen 1 in a million times. That is a silly thing to say, particularly when you follow it by, oh, I'm not going to read my insert. Like, this is silly, right? There is an appropriate level of both things here. Not that anybody should be given no information. I know any of these people in this group who push this birth control narrative of birth control bad, if they watch this, they're going to take it all out of context and say like, oh, look, she says you don't need to be talked to about your medication. Nonsense. That is silly. My internet presence exists to give people information that they need. But we cannot pretend that it is sensical to have a discussion about things that are so incredibly rare that they have barely any occurrence.
No, they just say, this is great, this will fix everything. And they don't give you any.
No doctor has ever said, here, this is great, it will fix everything. That's not, nobody says that. Is birth control used sometimes when other things should be? Absolutely. Is it often used in the absence of finding, what's really going on? Absolutely. But that does not mean we're handing it out and saying, here, this is great, it will fix everything. That's silly.
Any other options? And that is the other problem. Rather than educating women about their bodies and empowering them to make the best decision for themselves, they push these drugs starting at age 12, 13, 14 for girls who are not even having sex.
They're 12.
There's a doctor in this conversation and a non-doctor, and I hate to break it to you, but I am the one who is doing all of the educating. You are fear-mongering. I am presenting measured information that is appropriately nuanced and intellectually honest. And you are doing exactly what you are claiming all of the doctors are doing and what some of them are doing, but on the opposite side.
Then finally, they talked about natural family planning and cycle-tracking, which is increasingly becoming more popular as people turn away from birth control. People who are not even conservative, people just in general, are turning away from birth control. They said, according to the Mayo Clinic, fertility cycle-tracking is among the least effective types of birth control, and that
accurate
effectiveness varies by couple. It said that as many as 24 out of 100 women who use natural family planning will become pregnant within the first year. Now, something.
Surely she's not going to take issue with Mayo Clinic accurately stating the typical use effectiveness of natural family planning.
That I think is important to note is that natural family planning is not just a birth control, but couples also use natural family planning to get pregnant, to cycle track, to figure out when the woman is ovulating so that they can have a baby. So I don't.
Yeah, but those data points are not based on that. What? Is she claiming that the 24% is because the 24% who get pregnant were trying to? That's not what that data says. Is that? Surely she's not going to
totally trust these numbers. I would look at some other reports just to actually figure it out.
Stop it right now. Okay. Natural family planning can be very effective when used correctly by a very motivated couple who is appropriately educated on how to use it. I personally have used this in the past. However, you can't just go, oh, the Mayo Clinic said this is the failure rate, but I don't know. I don't really trust those numbers. Okay, we're done. Shall we see where the numbers come from? Oh, no, that might be the intellectually honest thing to do. See if we can find the data on where the numbers come from, and I can absolutely assure you that the 24% failure rate of natural family planning is not because that 24% of people who were using it to try and conceive. All right, so we need to know going into this that all forms of contraception have both a typical use and a perfect use categorization for how effective they are. Perfect use is only applicable in research studies because what that implies is that you are making no mistakes in how you use it, and that when mistakes are made, that data is excluded from the data set. There is nobody on this planet capable of being perfect in the way that they use a contraception. So all typical and perfect use are going to be different. The degree of difference between them is based on how much user error can be brought into the equation when we're talking about contraception. So like an arm implant, the perfect and the typical use, but it's going to be fairly close because you can't accidentally forget that you have that and then cause a pregnancy, right? The IUD, very similar. Birth control pills, going to have a higher perfect use and a lower typical use. Condoms, higher perfect, lower typical. Natural family planning, higher perfect, lower typical. But for looking at how effective it will be for an individual person who is not perfect, because, hi, that's humanity, right? None of us are perfect. You can't go by the perfect use because that is from data sets in the science where they have excluded any mistakes. Does that make sense? They've excluded the non-perfect use in those studies, and there's always data to exclude because nobody is perfect. What does this mean? This means that the conversation on whether somebody would be a good candidate to use natural family planning should go like this. Hey, are you interested in that? Or you've just asked me a question about it. Yeah, what do you know about it? They tell you. All right, let me tell you about NFP. It can be really effective if you know everything there is to know about it, which is going to require you to read a book or study a lot about this. You have to be checking many different factors every day to decide if you're in your fertile window. You have to be willing to abstain from having intercourse or be willing to use another method of pregnancy prevention during your fertile window. And you have to know that the risk of pregnancy over a year is about 20 to 25%. And if that's an acceptable rate for you and you feel comfortable doing all of this learning, you might decrease that yearly risk a bit if you are really well educated on this topic and really adherent to the method. So it may be less for you, but it's still going to be higher than other forms of contraception. But that might be an acceptable risk to you, and that is totally fine. Everybody's risk aversion is different, right? So if you really don't want to be pregnant, then that may not be the best method for you. If getting pregnant would not be that big of a deal, that detrimental to your life, then it might be more acceptable. So this is not just like with contraception. You can't say, here, this is the best way to prevent pregnancy and go ahead, there's no side effects. You also can't do that with natural family planning methods. You have to talk about what is best for an individual based on their risk aversion rate.
And also, it is true, cycle tracking, natural family planning, it comes down to how dedicated you are and how detailed you are. But I mean, it's that or, remembering to take a pill every single day at the exact same time. If you want,
which is a typical use, much higher effectiveness rate than NFP. So yeah, it does come down to that. And yeah, your level of personal risk aversion regarding pregnancy matters, but you can't lump this together. It's still more effective to use a hormonal contraception.
Wonder why women have little alarms on their phone? That is why, because it is so detailed down to the minute.
It's not for combined hormonal contraception, but go on.
That you have to take it every single 24 hours. They also said a 2021 study of period tracking apps for fertility planning found that out of 10 apps used, all of them gave conflicting dates of fertility, most of which were incorrect. As one commenter pointed out, they didn't acknowledge that no birth control is totally effective. It's like,
okay, I'll acknowledge it for you. No birth control is totally effective. Okay. But there are rates of effectiveness, and NFP falls at the bottom.
He said, what bothers me about this article is the emphasis on how cycle tracking fails as birth control, without mentioning that hormonal birth control and IUDs also fail.
At much lower rates.
No method of birth control is foolproof. No one ever said that cycle tracking was perfect, but
I don't think anybody ever said that any form of contraception was perfect, but perhaps I am wrong.
At least it offers women an alternative to the terrible side effects of synthetic hormones.
The terrible side effects of synthetic hormones are individual. Some people do not have terrible side effects. In fact, a lot of people really feel a lot better on hormonal contraception. Your individual experience of having terrible side effects is valid, but that is not a across the board thing.
The only thing that is 100% effective is abstinence, is keeping your legs closed. But
I hate when people say this, okay? People don't agree with me, but abstinence is not birth control. Abstinence is the absence of need for birth control. Additionally, natural family planning to be effective requires periods of abstinence. which is why it's not always very effective.
That is literally the only thing that is 100% effective. There is a risk with the pill.
It's not 100% effective. That is like saying not getting in a car has prevented you from having a car accident. No, you weren't at risk for having a car accident because you didn't get in a car. It didn't prevent it. It just wasn't a risk.
The IUD can fail. Condoms can break. People can even have failed vasectomies.
Yes, we know. I know.
Resulting in pregnancy. But they didn't.
That doesn't make lying about how birth control pills work and their side effects, or being intellectually dishonest with how you present information, or just not knowing the information, so being unable to present it, that doesn't make that okay.
Talk about any of that. But the difference is, these chemical forms of birth control also come with serious side effects, and women deserve to be able to make educated decisions about what they are putting in their bodies.
Yes, so could you please stop interfering with my goal of making sure that that is the case?
That should not be a conservative, right-wing, politicized talking point. This is about truth and about women's health and their right to know.
Interesting, because I haven't heard any real transparent truth happening in this video.
Know what they are putting in their bodies. I also think, and this is just kind of like a funny anecdote, not really an anecdote because it's out there, but they had been studying men's birth control for a very long time.
Oh, no. She's going to say it. She's going to say the side effects were too bad and they stopped the study. She's going to do it.
And then they stopped it because men were having the same side effects that women have. So now it's just...
All right. That's not how it happens. Okay. If you would like to know how this works, and not saying that I agree with how this works, I'm just saying that this is how we get medications approved for use in the United States, then you should know this before you spout off things like that. So the reason those studies were stopped was not because, oh, woohoo, the researchers felt bad because the boys had side effects that all the girls had, but nobody cares about the girls. That's not how this works. What happened in those studies, the reason that they were stopped, is because when you are introducing a new medication, the requirement is that the side effects and risks of that medication are reasonable when compared to the statistical risk of other more serious or similar side effects or risks if you are not on the medication. That is an extraordinarily high bar for somebody who is a male to achieve, because male birth control, or birth control made for people who were assigned male at birth, is required to leap a hurdle of the risk of not being on it, which is nothing. The physical risk of somebody who is male not being on birth control, hormonal birth control that they've studied, is nil. It's zero, right? Should we be able to take into account the risk of pregnancy when we're studying these? I would argue yes. However, that's not how it works to get medications approved in the United States. So if you actually think that this should happen, you should be lobbying to change how the approval process works. And the reason that the side effects are okay when studying birth control for people who are female is because the risk is compared to the risk of pregnancy. And all of those things are 2 to 10 times higher in pregnancy, okay? I hate when people present this as, oh, boo-hoo, they care about the men having side effects and not the women. Nonsense.
Just on women. So just think about that. That's my feminist high horse for the day.
If you actually want to be on a feminist high horse, why don't you work on actually being a feminist?
That is absolutely BS. Somebody commented and said, there are actual health risks associated.
It is BS, but not for the reasons you've said. It's BS because you don't know what you're talking about.
Using birth control, short and long term. News outlets should start being honest and quit playing politics with people's health. Somebody else said, what is it with you people being so opposed to informed consent? Why do you want to hide the risks of birth control from women? Because it's about control.
That's not what it's about. That's not what is happening. And that is exactly what you've done in this video.
Liz, who was formerly with Tim Pool, I love her. She posted something under this NBC article that was so good. She shared an article that NBC themselves published back in March of this year. And she said, it's even from the same source. Please educate yourself before you encourage somebody to get cancer. And then she posted this article.
Overall risk of cancer, all cancers in people who have been on hormonal contraceptions is either neutral or lower than somebody who has not. Okay? If we're going to talk about informed consent, can we please do it in an actually informed manner?
Article again that NBC wrote, hormonal birth control methods raise breast cancer risk, study shows. In March 21st. NBC
That's
and
not
these news
an own.
outlets
You're not
do not care about women. They do not care about reproductive rights.
Yeah, I know. They're capitalist organizations, right? They just care about giving money to people who make them be able to continue to make money. But neither do you.
You deserve the right to make an educated choice about your health. You deserve to have all the facts. You deserve to have a doctor that tells you everything before you choose to have any kind of treatment.
And you deserve for the information you're getting to be accurate and appropriately nuanced.
These news outlets care about is politics and doing anything they can to villainize the other side. And often that is at the expense of truth.
Yeah, at the expense of truth, villainizing the other side. That is a excellent wrap up of what happened in this video. And we can move on now. Nothing in that video was helpful or beneficial. It was fear mongering.